everything else is controlled by the occupier. Your state has ceased to exist. They don't even see you as someone worth negotiating. So this is the example of the Second World War, where we have puppet state, completely controlled by the government. There is no negotiation because we do whatever we want. We cleanse you of your state. We don't even allow you education. We allow you nothing, because the states feel that they don't have to negotiate. And this is the examples they need to talk about. And that's why OG's case is mostly uncomparative. But let's deal with CO. Their main idea is we have one leader that is then going to unite the nation, and then it's going to be nice, and we're going to have cooperation. We say that when you have a leader that divides you because you already want to rebel, but a leader who some people trust, you get division inside of your state. Then you get the fractions that they want. Notice Iraq cooperated with the USA after the invasion and still cooperates to this day. But they have so many different fractions that can do nothing in order to strengthen the government. Then you get infighting. And then you have multiple groups which compete for power, and neither of them actually fight for what they want and join forces against the occupying force. A conclusion is that this state is completely incompetent of doing anything, because the people support nobody. They support their specific fraction. The international community has no idea who to trust, because you have competing narratives. But the comparative is, if you have one clear leader that is recognized by the international community as being the leader that says, we want to fight, this is illegitimate, A, very clear message to the international community, B, the people unite behind this leader. And as a consequence, you actually get arms. People send you arms. Even if you don't intervene, as OO says, you can give them munitions, weapons, and everything that they need to fight them off. So this is why Afghanistan and the US is retreating, because they simply don't have the power to do so. I'll take you a bit later. So let's go on with opening opposition. They say that during the peaceful times, it was good. Notice the largest expansion of Israel was during the peaceful times. Notice Tibet, that was peaceful, has no autonomy, has absolutely nothing, because you do not fight. So in their world, we only lose everything we have. But then CO tells you you care more about your lives. Look at the comparative. You're peaceful, but still an Israeli soldier will shoot an unarmed child on the street. A Chinese soldier is going to shoot a Tibetan monk because he doesn't care. He doesn't respond to anyone. And regardless of what they do, it only gets worse, because your goal is to eradicate these people, to control this territory fully, to annex it at one point. How you do this? By constantly diminishing the population, by having more and more and more human rights abuses. Because as long as this population exists, you have a threat. You cannot control this territory fully. So your goal as an occupying force is to destroy this people. See what China is doing to the Uyghurs. See what China is doing in Tibet, with also re-education camps. So we say it is better to fight than to lose everything you have, to not be able to even have children because the state can sterilize you at one point. So this is the comparative. You're not only losing your lives, you're losing the fight for what you want, because maybe your parents and friends died. You're losing your livelihood. You're losing every single thing you care about. And we see this. See the example of Kosovo rising up against Serbia. See the example of Croatia and Bosnia rising up, even though territory was controlled by Serbia. So these are the examples we're talking about. Yes, opening, I'll take you.
Vietnam was not worth it because your economy was fucked for the next 4 decades. In my country, when we were occupied, we were perfectly peaceful and lived pretty fucking good lives during occupation.
You once again need to talk about states which have had independence and then been fully occupied and had significant, I don't know what your state is, sorry. We did say Croatia is our state, so unfortunately. But why do you actually can fight? Notice, in the status quo, one person can do the damage of 1,000. One person can stop the entire army from moving across a bridge. Because one person can do so much damage, any conflict in the long run is not justifiable for you, because if you have a large amount of people that is fighting you, you will simply have to withdraw, because either you don't know the territory, you don't have the information. And this is why currently the only large-scale occupation is Tibet, where people refuse to fight, and Israel and Palestine, which is a very specific example in which Israel controls all the borders and doesn't even allow humanitarian aid and food to enter these countries. So this is the comparative. You lose everything, you do not fight, you lose even more territory as it goes on. So what do we tell you and what do we bring you and why we take it over OG? We finally explain to you why you're able to fight. because you're able to get the support from the international community, because you're able to get the arms, but also you get motivated people, you get more of them on our side. You get an entire unified front instead of a divergent groups that fight for their own goals. We give you a correct characterization of what an occupation actually looks like and what your capacity to negotiate is. This capacity is zero. You get only what you're given because these states control everything. If you fight, then you have an opportunity to give them enough harms, enough costs in order to force them to retreat or to force them to come to the negotiating table. If you do not fight, then you're simply giving up. And then you become another little pawn that has lost everything to one more big state.
We'd like to thank the government whip for their speech and invite the opposition whip to conclude the debate. Thank you.
Am I audible? Is this okay? Okay.
Yes, this is good. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay. Okay, I'll start in 3, 2, 1. So I think like the main issue we have with CG is that they just assert that people somehow are nationalistic and that they will take up arms. Okay, I think most people aren't that nationalistic. Anna tells you this, right? And I think this is crucial to understand for both OG and CG's cases, right? Because both of their cases, to a certain extent, rely on the fact that people will get mad at these leaders and either start their own resistances or won't see them as the legitimate leader and so on and so forth. So firstly, I think people generally care more about like their material wealth rather than they care about how about their nation, right? Why is that? Like the nation is a very abstract concept. I think it's very, very hard to like get under that, but it's way easier to get under, I don't know, having access to water, having access to food and so on and so forth. People also have like a number of other interests, such as, I don't know, caring for their children, etc. etc., right? So I don't think this is necessarily true that people will take up arms. But even if people do take up arms, I think this is profoundly problematic for a number of reasons. A, just know that this is a form of asymmetric warfare. I think most of the wars we see right now aren't Vietnam style, where we can just go guerrilla warfare and actively like defeat the US, but rather are wars in which, I don't know, you have a huge opposing force that can literally obliterate that specific country. I think they have all the incentives to that. But furthermore, I think that there's an issue of like forcing people to do that, because at the moment, and note this is like Anna's material, at the moment which these leaders take an active stance against these countries, because not wanting to cooperate means taking an active stance against these countries. That means you create more pressure on people to actively take up arms, right? Innocent people that won't have any other alternative at the moment which there is no cooperation, there is no stabilization of that specific region. And this leads to, like, I think the most important impact in this debate, which is the creation of extremist and general terrorist cell, like extremist groups. Why is that the case? So what Anna tells you is that these are very, very vulnerable regions, right? With very vulnerable people. I think the main rhetoric that extremist like groups generally have is that, look, the state is failing you and they do not provide you with basic necessities, right? Because note that, for instance, in like the Middle East, what most extremist groups, general like terrorist groups, is that they do provide infrastructure, they do provide what? They do provide some form of welfare, right? I think at the moment which the state actively fails to provide that specific welfare, it's way easier for these extremist groups to like cater to vulnerable individuals and make them join their organization and so on and so forth. Why is this extremely problematic, and why is this like crucial for long-term development, as Anna tells you, of these countries and their stabilization? Because you lose the moral high ground, right? Because at the moment, I think this is like tackles both OG and O's points about how like you get easier peace talks and whatnot, right? Because generally speaking, the reason why like states don't take sides in like conflicts and in occupations is because there is no clear moral high ground, right? You cannot be sure which one of these countries is correct, right? What you need as a leader of these countries is to keep that moral high ground in order to be able to have better negotiations, in order to be able to, I don't know, have like international organizations, the UN or whatnot, actively support you. Now, just like moral decision, why like ethnic cleansing won't happen and why this is not the comparative. So firstly, just know that occupying states also have a lot of incentives not to be extremely evil, right? So see, I don't know, Russia won't probably like do anything very, very bad in like Crimea, precisely because they would get more economic sanctions, precisely because they would get, I don't know, more interventionism from other states, right? So we're constantly afraid that other states will intervene there. So that occupation won't necessarily be as bad. When it will be bad is the moment which you do have like an argument, right? You can like point out to extremist terrorist groups and say, we are actively trying to fight these extremist groups. We are the ones trying to stabilize the country, not this leader that is constantly fueling like extremist rhetoric. So right, so that's the moment which these countries are more likely to be able essentially to react in a negative manner, not only have the incentive to, as O tells you. And like so ethnic cleansing doesn't happen in Tibet. First, again, like the Dalai Lama is still in power, right? Whereas China, the actively does support another Dalai Lama, right? Their own Chinese Dalai Lama. Why the Dalai Lama can still maintain his power and still maintain a certain amount of autonomy is precisely because they were passive, right? Precisely because they were able to maintain a moral high ground that other states could have used against China. If China right now goes and does ethnic cleansing in Tibet, it's very, very likely that states will put economic sanctions on it, that states will do other things, because like states are tied to their voter base, right? Because we want to appear nice to their voters. Before going any further, OG, please.
Yes, we gave you 4 mechanisms through which cooperation with the occupier destroys any chance for future ability for separation and independence, only one of which was anger at the leader. No team in this room addressed all of those reasons, and therefore we show you how we're perpetuating the enormous harms happening on a day-to-day basis that come as a result of occupation.
Okay, so I think you have more like incentive and more capacity to negotiate with like occupying forces in international forums, because crucial in all of these conflicts, as all the teams have mentioned in this debate, there are like international instances of like peace talks or like ceasefire regions and so on and so forth, right? I think the only way in which you can get concessions from these states, small things such as getting access to water and so on and so forth, is at the moment in which you maintain that moral high ground and you choose to cooperate, because you like states won't want to rally behind you in that specific moment. So just know that extremist groups are the only thing that does this, right? They look very, very bad. They can actively like agitate voter bases of Western states to not intervene in that specific region or to take a specific stance, right? So just know that like Israel-Palestine, right? Most of the rhetoric that like the Republican Party in the US has for why we don't support Palestine in a way is because Hamas, right? Is because terrorism happens there, right? So this is essentially what blocks any form of like negotiation and long-term development of that country. Furthermore, like again, CG does say some other things, such as like at the moment which I don't know, you fight enough and you somehow assert that like these states have the capacity to resist. I think this profoundly false again because of the asymmetry. And furthermore, I think like just getting more people killed and just like creating more destruction and like damages there does not necessarily mean you have a higher like position at the table, right? I think most states have the highest position at the moment, which they are able to garner enough international support in order to be able to to do this. But furthermore, Anna uniquely proves to you why this motion is about leaders, right? Why leaders specifically are the only ones that can actively ensure stability in that region, and why national leaders are the only one that can do this, right? Because the alternative, and I think this is like complete miss by OO, is the fact that very, very likely one of the reactions of these occupying states would be to put puppet leaders, puppet governments, or to try to essentially influence elections and control the region, because they have all the incentives to get those specific mechanisms, right? So firstly, that's the moment which you destabilize it more, because probably local bureaucrats and like local leaders won't react well to this, won't cooperate with them, because they don't see them as the legitimate leader. The population won't cooperate with them either. But second of all, I think this ensures this is the only mechanism by which you can ensure stability, because generally most of these regions aren't as centralized as teams presented. So that specifically does not have 100% power over what the regions are doing. I think it's crucial to have a national leader there that can actively influence these bureaucrats to act in a positive manner. We see more people on our side. We allow for the international intervention. Please vote you.
I'd like to thank the closing opposition whip for their speech, and in fact all speakers for a good debate. Would like to invite